Well, I had this dream fantasy that once I got that fuselage down here in the hangar, I could just bring those wings right in here, get them put right on, and would be right on our way to putting the plane back together. You know, things didn't quite go as I had thought. Once I got that backseat heater control box approved and back, it didn't take me very long to get it put in and then put the boot cowl and panels on and stuff and get the windshield in. That went surprisingly well, even though it was pretty cold out here. So I was back on track again. Well, that slowed me down when I looked at my wing struts and took them apart and saw that they needed to be worked over pretty good. And I still was going on the idea that I could just, once I got those done, I'd get the wings in here and get them put on. Well, once I got the wings in here and uncovered, my fantasy was pretty much dashed with discovery that that one flap had been damaged. And as I get to looking at the wings, I got them all cleaned up and stuff, and now that I'm looking at them, I can see a few things that probably should be done on them. I knew there was going to be some patches to make on the top where the birds pecked holes in them. I think I'm going to pull those controls, the ailerons and the flaps off, and clean those mounts up on those. I did take that left flap off of there and got it ready to go up to repair it. When I took it off of there, the pins on there were a little stiff. I've got that flap off of there. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is take it up to the basement and take it apart to see how much damage is in there. Probably going to need to order at least one rib. I think I've got everything else I need. First thing I'm going to do is disassemble this thing. I guess there's no reason to be gentle with it because I'll just recover the whole thing anyway. I'm not going to try to just patch it, I guess. So anyway, where do we start here? I want to cut in here very bad. There's nothing wrong with the fabric, it's plenty strong enough. Okay, we got rib stitching on here. Okay, well the good news here is these ribs are all fine. This trailing edge section right here is bent, so I'll have to call Stoddard's in Anchorage and see if they can send me a new one. Mostly this is in pretty good shape. There's a big divot down here in the leading edge that they filled with Bondo. I've got masking tape over these rivet heads. I worked mostly with Cessnas for years, the Havilland Beavers and some other airplanes, but mostly Cessnas. And Cessnas, the flaps on the hand operated flaps like the 170, 180, 185, when you put the handle all the way down, the flaps are all the way up. The flaps are locked up, and on the later ones they have electric motors to actuate them and stuff and put them down. When they come up, they're up. They're in a fixed position. Piper flaps, and I believe Citabria flaps are the same way. When the handle is down and the flaps are all the way up, the flaps are spring loaded. So when the airplane is sitting out in the weather, especially if it has a little bit of a tailwind or a gusty wind, the flaps want to go down and they'll flop. And I've seen those things just flopping back and forth and up and down and stuff as they're sitting there in a gusty day. What a lot of guys will do is pull the flap handle all the way up and put the flaps all the way down, and then they're latched, they're in fixed position. I never did really like that on principle, because if they're down all the way, then that wind hits them, there's a lot more force on them and a lot more chance of them getting torn loose or something. But in a way, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of another, because otherwise, if you don't do that, they're just flopping up and down. one of the other problems with doing that, especially in this country where it's wet and on floats, is when they're down like this, water invariably gets inside of these flaps, and it gets down inside of this channel here, and that fills up with water, causes corrosion. But the other thing that can happen on there in the wintertime, like now, you get water down in there and it freezes and it won't come out, and then your flaps are heavy and they're out of balance. If you have them down and locked down, when you put them up, the weep holes here on the back of these flaps will just start draining water out of them. So I just leave my flaps up all the time, and then I have a control lock that I put on there between the flaps and the ailerons to keep them from moving around. But there's a pretty good channel in there, and that water fills up in there and stays in there. And of course, if you know it's sitting a lot out on a field or something like that, that water's just going to stand in there all the time. But if it's winter time and you've got them down, water gets down in there and freezes, that could be a disaster. The flaps could rip right off, get out of balance and start fluttering or something and just rip right off. So there's the piece off of there. Almost all of that is good except for this section right here. I thought sure one of those ribs was going to be tore up, but that's all in good shape. So the nice thing about building one from scratch is you put all this together. A person could paint all this stuff, corrosion proof it before you put it together, and then you're a lot less likely to have any corrosion in these seams and stuff here. I did have an airplane that I was flying several years ago when I went down in the springtime to do a pre-flight on it to check it out. This hinge right here just came right off. It got corrosion in between that hinge mounts onto that spar with some rivets, and it's a steel hinge and aluminum bar, and it just corroded out. So I had to order a new flap. If I knew where that old one was, I could go get it and disassemble it and take the trailing edge off of it. But I'm afraid that's long gone. Spent some time yesterday going through the parts book and looking up pieces and stuff for this. And a new flap, uncovered flap, is over $1,500. Univair had these trailing edge sections. They're about 80 some bucks a piece, but they wanted another 40 bucks shipping. Well, that was just in the US. They just ship UPS, and it probably would have been 120 bucks or so for shipping on it here to Alaska. Anyway, I called Stoddard's in Anchorage. They specialize in Supercubs, but they have parts for all kinds of airplanes. I've done a lot of business with them over the years. They've been really good. Of course, the problem is they're in Anchorage, but still easier to get some stuff out of there than it is out of down south. Anyway, they didn't have this in stock. I figured since they were a Univair distributor, and they do carry all kinds of Supercub parts and stuff, basically most everything, that they would have this in stock, but they didn't have it in stock. But what they do carry is a blank length of this that's folded up like this, that's 8 feet long. Well, this happens to be the same stock, the same material is used for the trailing edges of the ailerons as well as the flaps. And a lot of guys, when they're building airplanes, rebuilding ones or whatever up there, especially up in that Anchorage area, Fairbanks and places where they do a lot of Supercub work, they extend the flaps. So a standard length of this would be too short for extended flaps, and they extend the ailerons also, extend the wings out and stuff. So it makes sense to carry an 8-foot length of this, and then you can buy it and cut it to whatever length you need depending on what you're using it for. Unfortunately, 8 feet is too long to get shipped by the mail, so they're going to cut an 8-foot stick of it down to 6 foot long, which will fit in a mailing tube, and mail it down to me. Now, unfortunately, this is 62 inches long. So if you take a 96-inch long piece, which is 8 feet, and cut 62.5 inches off of it, then that doesn't leave enough left over to do anything with. Anyway, it's kind of a waste to have that as an 8-foot long piece, and it comes blank, so we'll have to cut out these sections here where the ribs go in and stuff. But that's on its way. I've been working on this, cleaning this up. It's been a real pain getting that masking tape off of there. I've got a song dedication for all those people who insist on using masking tape here over these rivets and stuff. I'd like to send that song out to them. It's called May the Bird of Paradise Fly Up Your Nose. This is maybe all right for somebody that's working by the hour taking that stuff off, but it's sure a pain in the butt getting that stuff off of there. It may be easy to cheap to put on there, but it's definitely not the right stuff for that when you go to clean it up. The masking tape also absorbs moisture, and it gets in that glue and reacts with it for some reason, holds moisture in, holds water in, and it causes corrosion. Anyway, it's just a pain. It's just a pain. So going through the parts on this and looking at Univair's site, I'm looking at different things. One of the things here, we've got some dents in this leading edge that were filled with Bondo, and I was looking at maybe replacing that leading edge or something. I don't really need to. I can just put some body putty or filler in there and fill that back, bring that back up again. It's got a little crack in it right here where it got dented, but a little spot putty, blazing putty or whatever in there, I'll bring that stuff back up, and a little bit of that microfibers, micro balloon. I got some really lightweight body putty I can fill this back in with. I did get to looking at these hinges, and this hinge here is the one that the rod that activates the flaps attaches to, and this hinge right here is about $80-some at Univair for a new one. And this one down here, as simple as it is, it was like $50-some. I have had these hinges fail before on me. They're steel and they're riveted onto aluminum skin here. Of course, this thing's exposed to the salt air continuously. These were painted pretty good, but they've got some rust on them. Well, right now I'm debating whether I should disassemble this flap. Like I said, this flap is over $1,500 new plus shipping, and these pieces are $100 a piece, say 50, 60 bucks, 60 bucks a piece, and they are showing rust. If I take them off of there now, clean those up, sandblast them, and powder coat them, they'll be good for as long as I need them. They're kind of complex because you've got two ribs coming in here, and of course this leading edge. I got to look at that and see what I want to do there. I don't know.